Hello, and welcome to Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia. We are here once more with an interview subject, and I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Penelope Reed to the show. Penelope, welcome to Adventures in Theater History.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
And
it is wonderful because you're so rooted in Philadelphia and Philadelphia theater history that I learn a little bit every time we meet on stage or something.
Oh, that's so nice of you to say. I should mention right at the top that Penelope and I, as we speak this week here in late August of 2023, are currently in a show together.
Yay.
Out at Act Two Playhouse. But by the time you hear this, the show will be over. But I've been having a marvelous time all this summer working with Penny and Tom Teddy and Mary Martello and Ellen Ratner and a lovely play called Boca.
It's great.
We'll leave that aside for the moment because about a year ago, our first time we actually got in touch, about a year ago, we released our episode on Jasper Dieter. And I interviewed Barry Witham, the late Barry Witham, about his book on Jasper Dieter. And I then interviewed Marcy Bermusi, who's the current head of Hedgerow Theatre. And she took me on a walking tour of the campus, and it was all great. And it was a very popular episode right away. So many people responded to it. And I got one email from a woman named Penelope Reed, who said, would you like to hear more about the Hedgerow Theatre Company? I could tell you all about all the stuff you missed, because we pretty much stopped the narration of the Hedgerow Theatre Company some point in the 1950s. And we certainly stopped after the death of Jasper Dieter in the early 70s. And I wrote you back, as I recall, and I said, yes, I would, but not right now, because I'm about to embark on the second season of the show, which is all about disputes and disasters and fights and things. And from what I can see, your tenure at the Hedgerow Theatre Company was wildly successful. I'm sure you had moments when things developed some tensions, and that's inevitable in the theater. But I say, that's not our theme right now. Penny, let me get back to you on that. So I was very pleased when it turned out that we were cast in the same show. And I thought, well, here's my chance to really get to know her and then get her on the record to talk about her life and career. So here we go. This is what we're going to do now. So we're going to start in the year 1962. By 1962, most of your family, your mother and your stepfather and your siblings, you go to Rose Valley. You're suddenly just a few doors down from this longtime theater company where you have some, connections. And does your mother immediately get involved with it, or do you immediately
My mother immediately got involved in the classes. I was still living with my grandmother, finishing out. I did and intended to finish up my senior year in high school, Claymont High School. Okay. And I was doing theater at the Brandywiners, at Wilmington Drama League, Breck's Mill. Once I met my father, I knew who I was.
I see.
So I was acting. There was no doubt about it, and having a ball. And then I was at Arden for 3 years, but Arden, the Robin Hood Theater that now is Candlelight, right. But Robin Hood was a summer stock theater. Right. And my grandmother let me do my first year, my first summer, and knowing that this would get it out of my system. Well, it didn't at all.
I could have told her that.
There were all these other people, these big people, right, who inspired me. So then I was allowed to do a second year. The third year, I went to Colorado, Perry Mansfield School of Theater and the Dance. Mm-hmm. By that time, I wanted.
You were hooked. You were you caught the disease.
But I came back, and that fall in September, my father died.
Right. He had lung cancer.
Lung cancer.
Right.
And I was so devastated.
Of course.
And I was actually playing at the time Gittel Mosca in Two for the Seesaw at Wilmington Drama League. And it was very sudden. I mean, he was declining, but the death was sudden. And so
he was living in upstate New York at that point, along the Hudson, right?
That's where he was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
That's where the burial was too.
Right.
And so I went to the wake. They read the poem, I must arise and go now and go to Innisfree. And so then I had to come back on the train to the technical of this play, and with two character play. And the character's name was Jerry. And my father's nickname was Jerry. Well, so you can imagine all of the pain. But on the train back, I was vowing, I will make your life meaningful, because he died at 38. He was with the Shakespeare Company. He was
in Stratford, Connecticut. Yeah.
Not in Stratford. It was in New York.
Well, he was working with I mean, he was a serious theater person. Yeah,
absolutely.
And discovered he was ill, and there was really and the course of his illness was very sudden, unfortunately.
And he had a wonderful wife, Judith. Judith, they both just embraced me coming in, and I was part of their life. It was really wonderful.
So it was a big life passage when he passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. You're 18 years old. It's 1962. You've just arrived here in Rose Valley, and your mother has already gotten involved with this local theater company.
So my mother was taking the classes. She said, I think it'll be great if you came to Hedgerow and took classes too. So I went in. So
they were giving regular acting classes at that point. They didn't actually have much of a company, because as we've discussed, the company had a big financial crisis in the mid 1950s.
The 50s. Right? The company wasn't like it was under him when in his full vigor.
Right, in the 30s, 20s and 30s, yeah.
Yeah, even between 45 and 55, the company was much more into choosing their own shows, voting on their shows, and he was not too happy about that, because people were picking their own parts.
I see.
So anyway, I go up the steps of this old house, which is called Hedgerow House.
Right.
I go up the steps and I go, there is this ancient guy there. To me, he's ancient.
Sure.
I'm 17, right?
Okay.
But his eyes were so intense. You could feel, here is a genius. And being around my grandfather, I could feel that energy of theater people. And so I auditioned for him. I didn't end up in the beginning class, which I was very happy about. I ended up in the intermediate class. And then, so I'm sitting there, maybe I'd had 2 or 3 weeks of classes. And
there's about how many people in the class? How many other students?
I would say we had 10 to 12.
Okay.
And there's tension, because this big brain is there. And you don't know what he's going to say. And so he's sitting there, his legs are crossed. I noticed he wore his pajamas under his regular pants. It just made life quicker.
Right.
I guess.
He was the kind of guy that got up in the morning, put his pants on over his pajamas.
I never run into anyone like this.
Well,
he started, he leaned on the table and he started knocking on the table. He had a cigarette in his mouth and he started lighting one cigarette after the other, when he finished. And you could see he was upset. It wasn't the usual, how can I make this person better? I'd never seen him angry, and he was getting more and more tense and banging on the table. And then he tapped it strong and he looked at this 22-year-old woman who was doing her monologue. And he said, I can't take your money. You're just a bitch at bay. Go out and get some experience. And she was mortified. She walked out. We were all silent. I don't know what they thought, but I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be thrown out very soon because I have no experience. And I think he meant life experience, which I knew I didn't have, but that didn't happen. Pretty soon after, I was put with my mother in the advanced class. So I'm even more scared, right? Because I'm going to do something wrong here.
That didn't give you more confidence? It made you more doubtful. I see.
Oh, yes. But it helped when I got to Carnegie, because
Okay.
nothing was like this.
Right.
And we bonded over the year I had with him. He did a very unusual thing. He acted out the bartender in the play Anna Christie, with my mother playing Marty Owen, this kind of old drunk lady, and I played Anna Christie. So I learned my lines. I did the whole thing to the best of my ability. And I looked around the room and I looked at him and I exited and slammed the door to the kitchen. I couldn't face him. And my mother said, after I left, he put his arms up, shrugged, and said, "What did I say?" So he was such a character. And so I just constantly, I took classes with him all year and into the summer. I did my third year, just a show with Robin Hood Theatre.
Okay. So
I
you
did
weren't doing
my
shows at Hedgerow
final
yet.
show.
Okay.
And that's when I got my equity card.
All right. But what before we leave Jasper, your year with Jasper Dieter behind, what did you learn from him? What principles as an actor did he instill in you that you still bring with you to this day?
What I learned from Jasper, so many things, but most important is the truth. You play from truth. So you allow yourself to play like children play. You believe and play the pretend, but he would say you have to keep at least 4% of your conscious mind in charge. So you're not going to get lost and go to a funny farm. That was very important because back then,
Mm-hmm.
death
Well,
of a
we're in
salesman.
the heart of the actor studio Lee Strasberg period,
Exactly.
which is dominating American theater training, and a lot
Right.
of it was
And
deeply
even
psychological,
Stanislavski
completely,
said
yeah,
American actors shouldn't be doing his method because they're already too introspective. So you can't let yourself get so carried away that you're not in charge of what you're doing.
right. But what do you
And
remember? What
yet,
do you remember specifically Jasper saying about the? So you're saying it comes from a place of truth, and how would he express that?
there were three principles. The approach was humility, industry, aptitude for learning. And it's a working humility so that you always start out, I don't know. I don't know is your strongest phrase. Instead of knowing everything, like some actors come in, I already know it. You know nothing. You have this script and you're going to learn from the other people. You're going to learn what the director wants. So you have to keep very open and available to learn. So that was first. Industry, you're supposed to work hard. Don't slack off. Don't feel, let's do the easy way. And then you had to have an aptitude for learning. So you can't invent an aptitude for learning. He always felt that had to come with an actor. So that was the beginning. Then there were two arms. There was the intellectual arm, which was asking the 5 questions: what, where, when, why, and who. And he would say, if you answer those questions fully, the how takes care of itself. So you're more interested in the process of relating to each other instead of how it looks. A lot of time was spent on answering those questions. What am I doing? Where and when am I doing what I'm
So
doing?
while you're working on a scene, he would say, "Let's run through the questions. Can you answer these
Not
questions?"
really.
No.
You do your scene, and then we'd go back and we would analyze, how did we do?
Okay.
And he would catch you. Okay. They had a program, a great program in the 40s and 50s where they would do voice, movement, all kinds of study, the history of theater. You were dealing with very rich minds. So there was another side. There's the intellectual side, and then there's the whole your whole nervous system, the central nervous system. And that was, to me, that's the most important of what I got, which was mind, body, eyes, face, talk.
That's
So
the classic progression of Hedgerow trained actors.
exactly.
That was Jasper Dieter's dictum. Yeah.
And what later some people would only learn body, eyes, face, talk. But the mind was very important. That's your feelingful mind. It's not your intellect. What, where, when, why, all of that will take care of the intellectual part. But the mind is that base of your central nervous system. So if you have a script and it says, your dog died, some actor might do, your dog died, you go, oh no, because the line says, oh no. But if you're like a real person and somebody says your dog died, something has to happen inside of you. And you emotionally receive that. It spirals up through your body, which will follow naturally. Mind, body, then the eyes respond, face, and then you talk. This is all supposed to be a mechanism. It follows naturally because you're basing on truth. Right. So that has served me very well.
Wonderful.
And it served me with my students too, and actors.
Okay. Now I'm gonna fast forward your personal story a little bit here because we're gonna send you to college.
College was very important. I was able for 4 years at Carnegie get a lot of that technique.
Right. So let's before you applied to Carnegie Mellon and you are accepted at Carnegie Mellon. It was always your intention to study theater there. That's what you were there to do.
Carnegie Institute of Technology. Right. We were the last graduating class of what would become Carnegie Mellon University.
I see.
And when we heard it for the very first time, we're all there in our cap and gown. Right. We're hearing that's what. So people are making fun. Oh, honeydew you. They were,
I think.
But now it's very revered. Wow. I had Edith Warman Skinner as my speech teacher. And then I became her assistant my senior year. So that's why I love language. She helped me so much. And her first words, when I started, I learned, oh, the world's a stage. And she went, no, Penny, that's too pedantic. Only speech teachers talk that way. So lesson after lesson she gave me that was a wonderful compliment to Jasper Dieter.
But you use the training that you get first at Hedgerow and then at Carnegie. You take that to Milwaukee, right?
Yeah, immediately I take it to Cleveland, the Great Lakes Shakespeare Festival. That summer I spent there playing rotating rep, and so that was pretty fun.
Right. So this is the very beginning of the American regional theater movement. There's a lot of theater companies looking to take actors which are right out of training programs to put them into rotating rep, to do classical and modern plays together, and you were right there.
Oh, yes. And TCG had auditions, and a few of us got to go to the auditions. And I got some offers to go to ACT, up to Seattle, and some others. But I chose Milwaukee because they offered me Blanche and Streetcar and Mary Stuart, and they were the nicest. So that's why I went there.
Right.
And I loved it. It was Midwest is a great place to be.
Right. And I want to skip ahead a little bit with only one sort of side trip, that at some point after you left home, there was a great schism back in the Hedgerow theater world, wasn't there?
In 1968, Dolores Tanner came back. Okay. She had been studying in Texas. She was teaching in Texas. She was brought back to run the place.
Okay.
And she brought in the resident company, and she brought back repertory, and that intrigued obviously my mother, and they became bosom buddies along with Rose Schulman. In 1972, Jasper Dieter died. By this time, a man named David Ralph was artistic director, and Dolores was the main runner of the place. My mother did all of the Janet Kelsey as well as acted.
So she was the business manager.
That's right, business manager. And David Ralph was really terrific. And Jasper loved him. And he was doing some really cutting edge theater. He was doing Rhinoceros, other things. It was wonderful, edgy stuff like Jasper did.
Mm-hmm.
And Dolores and Rose went on a trip after Jasper died in 1972.
Mm-hmm.
Jasper died. They went on a trip. And when they came back, they wanted to do a little known Shaw play. Dolores did. And David Ralph didn't want to do it. And some of the theater names were there, like Ken Marini,
Mm-hmm.
Danny Fruchter.
Right.
Really wonderful. It was a wonderful company.
We're very young men at the time, but
Exactly.
had gotten their training there and were working there.
Exactly. Right. So it was a wonderful young company. I can say this because we all should grow up, It
was a long time ago now.
It's and I loved everybody.
Right.
But you had some phenomenal talents. But there was this really lesser known Shaw piece they wanted to do. And David Ralph did not want to do it. So the young people were upset. And there was a group called the Partners. The Partners from way, way back had bought the theater. I'm telling you too much. Okay. I know. That Anne Harding bought the house, right, formed the theater with Jasper Dieter and Rose. And when people died off, a new member was made part of the Partners. And so the Partners owned the land. They owned everything. And when this upset happened, they locked the doors on the young company of the theater. They locked.
So the old guard essentially locked out the young guard.
Exactly.
Guards, yeah.
And so the young people left to go to Strode's Mill under David Ralph and Danny Fruchter. And the board split, and Louis Lipa left. People like Louis Lipa was great. So my mother was the one person asked to go to Strode's Mill from that group, but she lives a block away from the theater with her 4 little children. So she stayed here. And then in 72 to 74, that's where there was a big legal mess, where out there, I don't know if they were People's Light yet, or no, they weren't, obviously. They wanted to change their name to Hedgerow Theatre. So there was an actual court case that was decided that Hedgerow Theatre should have the space it always was. So they lost that name, and I guess that's when they went to People's Light and Theater.
Oh, that's interesting. So I did not know that story. It's the first time anyone's ever really explained it to me. I'm always learning things about the Philly theater. Everyone goes, well, you know that story. And I go, no, I don't. I wasn't here.
One of my proudest things is that I brought them all back.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. So for many years, you lived and worked elsewhere. You were building a life in Milwaukee. You were a professor at the college there. You came back to this area, and you joined the company at the McCarter Theater in Princeton.
I spent 13 years at Milwaukee Rep, and teaching all along the way. And then McCarter, and while I was there, I ran the master's program at the theater.
And by this time, you have 2 sons of your own.
Oh, 2 wonderful sons.
Of course, right.
Yes.
And you teach at the Lawrenceville School in New Jersey.
Yes.
Right, which is a secondary school, but a very prestigious prep school for young men. You become the drama teacher there. But when does Hedgerow really again become part of your story? You're aware of it. Your mom's there the whole time.
And I would come and do some benefits periodically, to raise some money.
Right.
And when the place burned down.
Oh, wait, before we get there, hold on. Yes. In 1977, you come back to Philadelphia to do Glass Menagerie, a playhouse in the park with Maureen Stapleton.
I know. It was wonderful. And in 76, I was here. I spent the summer, I think it was 76, teaching up at Hedgerow house so I could write my master's on Hedgerow Theatre training.
Which you were getting at the University of Wisconsin?
No, at Marquette University.
At Marquette University, okay.
Mhm.
And but you were using Hedgerow as your subject.
Oh, yes, it was.
Right.
That's
so you
what
were
it is.
never out of touch with Hedgerow. You were always
Never, because
closely
my
in touch.
mother was
Right.
deeply involved.
Okay.
Yes.
And you come back, you do this run, you're playing Laura in Glass Menagerie, your mom's there in the audience.
Yeah.
Later, Hedgerow does Glass Menagerie when your mom playing Amanda. And then later, skipping out a bit, 25 years later on, you're playing Amanda at Hedgerow, and your son Jared.
Yes, yes, that was a great experience.
So that play has meant a lot to your family. But you mentioned that in 1985, so there's that crisis in the early 70s, which ends up in a schism, and there's a group that goes off to found People's Light and Theater Company. But the Hedgerow Theater remains. Rose Shulman and others are running it. But then in 1985 is the fire.
1985, a woman named June Prager came in.
Okay.
Probably 84, a little earlier than that.
Right.
Of course, Rose and Dolores were still there until they passed away. I'm not sure the times, but Mother was still the business manager. And the one remaining person with her was Susie Wayful,
Right.
who's still with Hedgerow.
Right.
And someone set fire to the building.
Right. It was a case of arson. Yeah,
it was definitely arson because they saw it in two different places around it. It was a terrible fire.
Yeah, the whole interior of the theater's burnt out.
Whole interior, the roof.
The panorama behind the old stage collapses.
Right, the
floor
special
collapses.
treatment Jasper had done for the theater. Yep.
So that is a huge, and the company survives, but mostly by working at local community colleges and staging small plays in Hedgerow House.
In Hedgerow House, the community let them do that because it's obviously residential.
Right.
Suburb.
So they're hanging on there. And at what point does somebody say to you, Penny, can you help us?
Well, there was a phenomenal person came down, but at this point, a man named, because June Prager left like a year after the fire. Okay. And David Zumbrunnen took over as the managing director. There were my mother and Susie and Yvonne Vincic at some point became the Troika before David Zumbrunnen came in. But then he brought an amazing guy down. This amazing guy is Paul Kuhn. Paul Kuhn came down from Canada, and he and Jared started Curio Theater, which is in Philadelphia right now.
Yeah, West Philadelphia, yeah.
So this is Paul Kuhn,
okay.
Amazing guy, talented actor. And for weeks, David Zumbrunnen would drive by the theater. He said, there's the theater. He never told him that it had burned down.
Oh. You can see it in the outside is intact, but he doesn't show the inside's all burned out.
Money to get back to Canada. So here he was, and to have this guy who's so gifted, built sets, designed sets, it was just wonderful. And I got to meet him because Jared came down after high school, after Lawrenceville Prep. He came and spent January till he went to college at Hedgerow. And that's where he and Paul Kuhn became fast friends. And I brought Paul this is all to answer your question.
Thank you. No, I'm following.
I brought Paul in to do lights at Lawrenceville School. And there were two totally different economies between Hedgerow, which had nothing,
no money. Right.
You know? Remember the place had burned down. They were doing shows at the house in different colleges. So he was there, and one day, it was in November, and they were working so hard to get the theater opened. And he said, Hedgerow is dying. And they were exhausted. There were about 5 people running the place at that time. Incredible people. And then volunteers, extended players, and of course my mother. But they were worn out, and I could see that. And so they were planning an opening, and I was another woman, another person, Maura Rankin was a fabulous sponsor and help to the theater. She was the president of the board at the time. And so she also told me we're in really rough shape. And so I came in, this is how I got back. I did 2 shows called Women of Heart, one woman shows, and it was always women, historical women, or women in literature that are really amazing women. And I did that in this barren theater. They'd gotten a roof on. We had no electric. There was some electric. Paul had rigged 6 lights up with broomsticks up above our heads. There were no seats. They brought in some chairs. No heat. They brought in some kind of kerosene thing. I was against the stone walls. There was nothing. And so I did a show, and then it brought in people. So we did a second show the same day. That was the launch of the new Hedgerow. So then they asked me to be artistic consultant for a year. So Zoran, my husband, and I would commute back and forth. And by the end of that year, they asked me to be artistic director. And my first goal was to get us out of debt. So we got out of debt that first year.
And you agreed. So you're leaving. So were you still teaching?
I did not leave.
You didn't leave Lawrenceville? Okay. So you're your husband, Zoran Kovacic.
This incredible man, we haven't talked much about, Zoran.
No. Okay.
Drove me every day back and forth. We would go because I had this calling with the students at Lawrenceville, the teachers and the students. It was such a haven. I had some of the most talented actors ever. These kids came from all over the world. It was so wonderful. So for 7 years, we commuted back and forth. So after those 7 years, and Hedgerow was growing and it was building, it went from a $70,000 budget with a $13,000 debt that first year. We got out of debt to a $700,000.
And you rebuilt the theater.
We rebuilt the theater. And little by little by little.
You were fundraising, you were meeting with architects.
Yes, my mother, it was so funny because I did the first annual giving fundraiser they ever did. And she was furious. She said,
no one had thought of this before?
No, they didn't believe in it. Right. She said, you're just wasting stamps. Well, she was careful with money. That's why we survived. But after we did it and money came in, she never objected to the annual fund again, But then we had this fabulous budget at the Lawrenceville School with a capital fund that would bring in money every year. If I needed lights or this or that, I could get it. So it was living in 2 realities. And I think that was great training for how you run 2 totally different theaters.
Right. At what point do you decide that you're going to leave Lawrenceville behind and move full-time back to Hedgerow?
Of course, I have to make money.
Right.
So one of the actresses that I had grown so fond of was Suzanne Roberts. I didn't know that she was wife of the Comcast person because
Suzanne Roberts. There's a whole other story. A famous Philadelphia actress, and there's a whole theater named after her on Broad Street now.
Yes, right? But she becomes my best friend, and
How does she become your best friend?
Oh, because let's go back. How do I know Suzanne Roberts?
Right.
So this woman sent headshots. I open it up, and there's a woman who's prison convict. Right. They're all Suzanne, different shades of Suzanne.
Okay.
And they were fabulous. She was a socialite. She was a poor person on the street. I went, these are all headshots. And I'm going, I've got to meet this person. She's so wacky. I felt immediately a connection. So I brought her in. I auditioned her for Christmas with the Naftarellis. I think that's it. It's a very famous farce in southern Italy. And she won the lead. And then she calls me. She said, I am so sorry, but I'm a wife of a corporate person, and we can take our family vacation, and I really have to do it. So she didn't tell me what corporation, but I'm understanding because she's now my friend.
Mhm.
I go, okay, I understand. The next thing that comes up is you can't take it with you. And she calls and she said, I'd like to audition for You Can't Take It With You as the Countess, which she had already played, I think, at Delaware Theatre Company.
Okay.
And I said, you don't have to audition. You're great.
Mm. Then
in the middle of our rehearsal period, she calls me, she's cast, she's wonderful. Right. And she said she was on vacation, her vacations. She was in a bike accident and she broke her leg. And she says, well, the cast will be off by technical week. Is it okay if I have a cane? And I went, yes, we'll get you a glorious cane. Best decision I ever made. Because then we were together. It was so funny. We're doing You Can't Take It With You. That's what she was in. You Can't Take It With You. She wanted to play the Countess. And she did. She was glorious. And Zoran played the man with her. And it was a really good production. And all of a sudden, I hadn't met her husband yet. Her husband is coming. Oh, that's nice. But also, Blanca is coming.
Blanca Ziska.
Yes.
From the Wilma.
From the Wilma. Terry is coming
from
Arden.
All these people he lives nearby,
to see this little chestnut. Yeah, right. To see a chestnut of a play. I did some great plays, but right. They're coming to see this. And I can't figure it out. And we find out that Ralph is Comcast, right. But it's not a big deal to me because he's the husband of my friend now. Right. So we just hit it off great because we're both kind of wacky, And so then we're sitting. Here's how I left Lawrenceville to work with Suzanne. We're sitting at Dignazio's restaurant in Media, just having a friend lunch. And she was just playing the fortune teller in Skin of Our Teeth. And she says, I have an idea for a TV show because, it's hard as you get older with lines. So she wanted to do something. She didn't have to learn all those lines. So she had this idea for this show for seniors. We didn't have a name for it. Just a show for seniors. She had a little outline of things she'd like to talk to people about, 60 little items. I said, that's great. If you want any help producing, I knew nothing about TV. If you want any help producing, I'll help you. I'm just going to help her with her little show. Suzanne does not think little. So that set us on a course. I think maybe my last year at Lawrenceville, I would be writing these scripts with her. She and I I produced her first 2 shows. We wrote the scripts, and Ralph didn't want to have anything to do with it. So we had to make our approach to one of the other people at Comcast, and he thought it was a great idea. So we launched this show. We did 2 shows. Well, all of a sudden, we have to get a real producer.
It's and popular. It gets good ratings.
The first producer. Yes, we go out. And so I become a main script writer and a segment producer. So I'm learning all this time. So the next 7 years, I commuted from Hedgerow to do Seeking Solutions with Suzanne.
In Philadelphia.
And we got this phenomenal, a second producer was Kelly Ryan. And Kelly Ryan stayed with her all the way. Hedgerow got too busy for me. But Suzanne and I stayed as great friends. And until she passed away, we would have dinner twice a week. We
Oh,
do
nice.
exercises. And
Yeah.
she even became earlier a member of the board.
Right.
And she
Well,
did a
she's
very
famous for
important,
being a supporter of the Philadelphia Theater Company, which is why her name's on the building, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
but
And
she
all these,
similarly was a benefactor of Hedgerow as well during this period.
oh yes, and oh yes, and what's great about what she did, it wasn't just Philadelphia Theater Company, it was lots of companies. And she would care about the theaters and she would give them advice when she saw something. I could do a whole show on Suzanne
Right. Well,
anytime.
thank you. We will
Yeah.
put her aside for the moment, though, because
Okay.
she's threatening to take over your
I know.
interview.
I know.
So, all right. At this point, the Hedgerow has gained funds. You've rebuilt the theater. What is the achievement you're most proud of during your tenure? Looking back at it now, and what do you look back and go, I'm so glad I did that. That just meant everything to me when I did that one thing.
I think the best thing I did, the most useful thing I did, was bring the community to accept Hedgerow again. It used to be called Hedgerow is in the, even during Jasper's time, in the community, but not of the community. So we moved
So it
a
was a little bit
block away.
like a convent. It was like a group of monks, who
Well,
live
and
over
also,
there. Yeah.
yes, the theater company was proud of itself, and here's the community. So I think my biggest long-term benefit to Hedgerow was bringing that together, developing the volunteer program, developing the school for children, and the services in the inner city, and things that made us more regional as well as the plays. And I did it very slowly because when you have no extra money, you can't do all the big ideas you might have. You have to work slowly. I will be forever grateful for people like Tom Teddy, Ken Marini, people coming back to perform, Louis
Louis
Lippa,
Lipa. Right.
to come back and share their talents. And slowly we built the company. And then I guess making us equity, that was a big deal. It hadn't been
When did
equity.
that happen? When did Hedgerow first get an equity contract?
Well, in the 90s. And then I did the small professional theater contract, so which would allow me to, after a couple of years, the young people could get their equity contracts.
Right.
So I really like that slow progression. I also love the fact we were training these fellows at Hedgerow House who would just come from college, where you're sort of a group, and you're thrown into the world of theater. But here they could make their own group and do plays, build a great resume for when they move on to the other places they're going to play. I always say they're going to play in their hedgerows.
Yeah.
There are other hedgerows.
Right. What's one production that you either acted in or staged or produced that you remember from your period that you're like, oh, that was special. That one really worked. And I felt like everything had come together when we did that particular show.
Well, I think we did an amazing King Lear.
When was that?
This was early on, and we spent a year on it. We spent
Okay.
a whole year working on it. We had the benefit of my getting the costumes from McCarter. So that was great.
Where you still had connections. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the whole set, we had this incredible set. It was kind of modern and raw iron set of stairs.
Okay.
It was great. Then, because I put it way before time, ancient time.
Okay.
So we got horns, actual cow horns.
Right.
So all of the horns were from that time. And some of the most wonderful people came in to be in it. I believe we did a really great job of Glass Menagerie, but we had a problem. I don't know if you heard about this. Opening night, there was a fire.
Again?
Yes.
Where, backstage?
But because we had a sprinkler system,
Right. Oh.
it put it, and again, it was arson.
But the sprinkler system stopped it from doing massive damage, but then you have water damage all over the place.
Yes.
Right.
And the thought was that the person who did the arson would destroy the lights, not the whole theater, but then we'd have to get more lights. So, of course, when we got the call at 2 a.m, we had opening night. Glorious opening night. And remember, I'm Amanda,
Right.
who has her own troubles. And so we're in bed. Zoran, who always got the calls if anything went wrong. So there's been a fire. So we go down. I immediately think, oh my, Jared played Tom. Did his cigarette start a fire? But no,
Oh, right.
he was on the whole other side of the theater. So we get there and the firemen are there. The smoke is pouring out of the theater.
Oh man, your heart
We
just
have
must
a
have been in your.
children's show that morning.
Yeah.
And I come in and the first thing I say, my jonquils,
Oh.
they had all melted.
Oh, for the children's show.
You
Oh.
know, there's a lot of other things wrong, but
Right.
there's my jonquils. We had to get daffodils, which aren't jonquils. But anyway, there's a willful part of me. So we were not going to close down because of this fire. They put the smoke out as best they could. The children were coming to see the show. The lights were blinking, you know, but we did that show. Then we had the show at night. And what was amazing is they actually conked out during the gentleman caller scene. So we put all of these candles around.
But yeah, but that's the whole point of the scene, is that the lights have gone out, right?
Exactly.
Within the action of the play, and you have to light candles.
By the end of the gentleman caller scene, at some point in time, there's still candles. At some point, the lights came up. I mean, it was like a miracle.
It's like the spirit of Tennessee Williams was flicking a switch.
And so, like Amanda, we were not going to give up.
No, that's amazing.
And then we won the Barrymore Best Play Award for The Lives of Bosie. That was a great one.
Right, with Austin Pendleton.
Yes, he was wonderful. And Austin came back this past year, and we read love letters together as Farsi's first launch of the 100th year.
Right. Yeah. And he lived in the house. He lived in the actors' housing. He insisted on it.
Yes, he didn't want to live anywhere else.
Right. So at what point do you realize my work here is done? I need to scale back. I need to pass this on. How old are you when you think like, okay, things need to move on?
Oh, well, I thought I would be doing the same thing my mother did. Like I would kind of be an advisor. So I knew we needed a successor because that's what you do.
Right.
So I had 3 in mind: Peter Reynolds, David O'Connor, and Jared.
A local director, and Jared, your son, who is now a very distinct. He's been to Juilliard. He's an actor, director himself.
He's running Curio, and he comes back and directs for us. I never thought he'd do it, frankly. And then Peter had his own job, and then David O'Connor. And then all of a sudden, Jared expressed an interest. And I said, well, let's do a pretend year. So I was ready as soon as there was a successor. Okay. Have a great time, and I can do my little teaching thing and my inner city stuff. And I joined Rotary Club. So I was very content.
Your career, you moved on from running the Hedgerow, but you never stopped teaching. You never stopped acting. You haven't really slowed down. You just moved on to other things.
Well, I thought it was over. Zoran and I were going to do Gin Game. It was going to open March 2020. COVID.
Oh, right. Right. I remember that. March 2020. Why is that a significant date? Yeah. Okay.
So we did a dress rehearsal, invited dress on the Sunday. On Monday, Jared had to close the theater. we were going to open on Wednesday or preview on Wednesday. So Zoran and I worked for 2 months every day doing those lines in Jinging, which are vast.
I know.
And thinking, oh, well, it's going to be over. And Jared did a great thing, a resident company locked in. He started to do Patreon videos every day. They would do a show, a legitimate written show or their own show. And that's what kept them all working all year long. They got stimulus money because they were working.
Right. Yeah, a lot of theaters actually, survived with the federal government stimulus
money. And I think
money.
Jared did it day one. Yeah.
Right. Well, so here we are at the dawn of a new era. We've gotten past the pandemic. Shows are going on, but theatrical activity is different. We know that. There's theater audiences don't come into the center of Philadelphia the way they used to. A lot of local theater companies have really struggled. Some have come back, but other places are still, just hanging in there. What does the future of Philadelphia theater look like to you? Where do you think the real energy is going to come from?
Well, one place, I see two places. One is youth, the young people who are so passionate they're going to work for nothing. And I saw.
But is that sustainable? Is it to ask people to work for nothing?
Well, they get older.
Yeah.
They get older.
Okay.
But the other thing I see, and I guess I'd put a person in my mind, which is Zuhaira McGill.
Mm-hmm.
I think she is an example, because not just because she used to come. I had her and her company come to Hedgerow for a couple years, and then she did my Sojourner when I did her first Sojourner, and then she was in a farce. Incredibly gifted person, but she is also about nurturing the next generation. So we are seeing more people who wouldn't have gotten roles before. There's more. I saw Gem of the Ocean, and I saw The Royale.
So the Gem of the Ocean, the great August Wilson play, was done at the Arden quite recently.
What Terry Nolan's doing by featuring August Wilson, what Charles did at Lantern, having Zuhaira direct The Royale, I think it is.
I saw that.
I went with Marcy, and I went to see it. Marcy's the artistic director of Hedgerow. It was stunning, the interpretation that Zuhaira brought to it. Also, I have worked now at Act Two with two amazing, to me, young women. One is Kate Brennan, and one is Megan Belwar Hollinger.
Yeah.
There is some of these women directors, it's like they've been unleashed, and all of a sudden you're working with these highly trained, brainy, heart-filled women directors. I'm seeing that Mary Martello is about to direct Sabrina Prophet, because we've got a lot here. And then Brian Anthony Wilson, oh my gosh, was wonderful in Looking Over the President's Shoulder. Connie Norwood directed it. The more people can see these great actors that are in our town, then they're going to celebrate them. I think we just have to do that.
Okay. Well, Miss Reed, Penelope, thank you for the gift of your experience, your knowledge, and your joy about what you do, and sharing the stories from your life and how that has been part of the story of Philadelphia theater. I'm so glad that we've managed to meet each other, become colleagues and friends. And I'm really honored to have you on our podcast. Thank you for your time and generosity of spirit.